J.D. Vance spots a man in uniform crying. What he says isn't in the script. The stadium in Colorado Springs was alive with energy. A sea of red, white, and blue flags fluttering under the bright lights as thousands gathered for the Veterans Appreciation Rally. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras flashing like stars in the night sky, and voices rising in unified chants that echoed off the walls. It was an event months in the making, designed to honor those who had served their country and to discuss future support for military families. J.D. Vance, stepping onto the stage, with his prepared speech in hand, surveyed the crowd with a steady gaze. Rows of veterans filled the front sections, some standing tall in their uniforms, chests adorned with medals that caught the light. Others seated in wheelchairs, their faces etched with stories of sacrifice and resilience. He began his address with warm greetings, the audience responding with thunderous applause that shook the ground. But then, as he glanced to his left, something caught his eye. A man in a crisply pressed army uniform hunched forward in the front row, his shoulders trembling, tears streaming unchecked down his weathered face. He wasn't hiding it, nor seeking the spotlight. It was raw emotion spilling out in a place meant for celebration. J.D. Vance paused mid-sentence, his voice trailing off as he looked from the teleprompter back to the man. In that moment, he set aside his folder, stepping away from the podium with a deliberate calm. Pointing directly at the soldier, he asked, "You, sir, what's your name?" A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd, the energy shifting from excitement to stunned curiosity. The man lifted his head, eyes wide with surprise, as if unsure the words were meant for him. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "I'm Staff Sergeant David Keller, sir." J.D. Vance nodded with solemn respect. "Come up here, David." The stadium fell into a heavy silence as David hesitated, then began his walk toward the stage, each bootstep echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet. This wasn't part of the plan. No script, no rehearsal, but sometimes the most profound moments arise unbidden. As David ascended the steps, his hands shook slightly, the weight of unspoken burdens evident in his posture. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. J.D. Vance extended a hand to steady him, his expression transforming from that of a speaker to one of genuine empathy, recognizing pain in its purest form. David saluted sharply, quickly wiping his tears with his sleeve, his voice cracking as he started, "Mr. Vance." But the words caught in his throat, and he looked down, a mix of shame and vulnerability washing over him. J.D. Vance placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Take your time," he said softly, lowering the microphone so the words were intimate, shared only with those nearest. The silence deepened, turning reverent, as if the entire arena was leaning in to listen. David drew a deep breath, then turned to face the thousands staring back. "I wasn't supposed to be here today." He began, his voice quiet, but steadying. J.D. Vance signaled for a microphone to be brought, handing it to him with an encouraging nod. David gripped it tightly. "My best friend, Corporal Elijah Grant, and I signed up together. We deployed together, made a pact to always watch each other's backs." He paused, swallowing hard. But he didn't make it home. A murmur swept through the audience, soft and sympathetic. David stared at his trembling hands. "I wear this uniform with pride, but every day I carry this guilt. Why me and not him?" J.D. Vance's face softened further, his focus entirely on David, the political agenda fading into the background. This was no longer about policies or platforms. It was about humanity, raw and unfiltered. David continued, tears welling again. "I guess I just needed someone to see me today." For a long beat silence reigned the crowd, absorbing the soldier's unraveling grief. J.D. Vance cleared his throat, clearly moved. "David, thank you for your courage, not just on the battlefield, but right here, right now." The audience stirred, many dabbing at their eyes, touched by the honesty that cut through the usual rally noise. "I didn't lose a friend," David pressed on. "I lost a brother." I held his hand in his final moments. His voice broke. "And I keep wondering, did I do enough, J.D.?" Vance nodded slowly, then called for a chair to be brought on stage. "Sit down, David. You're among family." From the crowd, a veteran shouted, "You did enough." "Soldier," applause erupted, not for a leader, but for a man bearing his soul. J.D. Vance addressed the audience. "How many of you have asked that same question? Did I do enough?" Hands rose tentatively at first, then in waves, hundreds acknowledging their shared burdens. "This isn't just David's story," J.D. Vance said, pacing thoughtfully. "It's the story of every veteran who returns home but carries the battlefield within." He set his speech notes aside completely. We planned to discuss funding programs, all vital things. But what's more essential is understanding the real impact when these heroes come back. Turning to David, he added, "You didn't return broken. You returned with a heart full of experiences too heavy to bear alone." David covered his face, overwhelmed by the compassion. J.D. Vance continued, "I've spoken at many events, but today I'm here to listen." The crowd quieted once more, and slowly a woman in uniform stood. "I lost my son in combat. I thought I was the only one still grieving like this." Another rose. "My husband did multiple tours. He struggles with sleep every night." Then a third. "My sister came home, but part of her stayed behind." Soon dozens were on their feet. Soldiers, widows, siblings, parents, each bearing invisible scars. David scanned the faces in awe. "I thought I was alone." J.D. Vance rested a hand on his shoulder again. "You're not. And that's the heart of what we're doing here." David, emboldened, looked out at the empathetic nods. Elijah was the one who kept us laughing through the tough times. He carried pictures of his baby girl in his helmet, dreamed of teaching after his service. His voice quivered. But on a convoy in Kandahar, our vehicle hit an IED. I survived with a broken leg. Elijah didn't. The words hung heavy. The dust, the chaos, his last words. "Tell my little girl I love her. I've tried to find her, but I don't know where she is." The audience clung to every syllable, tears flowing freely. J.D. Vance, visibly affected, leaned in. "Do you remember her name?" David nodded. "Amelia. She was 3. J.D. Vance gave a subtle signal to his team, offstage, setting wheels in motion without fanfare. "David," he said, "one thing I've learned is that no child of a fallen hero should grow up without knowing that love." David blinked in disbelief. "Sir, do you mean—" J.D. Vance offered a small, reassuring smile. "Let's see what we can do." Behind the scenes, aides mobilized, delving into records, contacts, archives. Anything to locate Corporal Elijah Grant's daughter. On stage, J.D. Vance refocused on the crowd. "We talk numbers often, but here's one that hits home. Too many veterans face silent battles daily. That's not just data. It's lives, families, futures." David whispered, "I almost became one of those statistics." J.D. Vance paused. "But you didn't, and your voice might save others." A young man in the audience stood. "My brother struggled last year. He felt isolated." David met his gaze. "Tell him he's not weak, he's human." J.D. Vance gestured broadly. This is healing in action when we drop the pretense and start sharing. What had started as a structured rally morphed into a tapestry of vulnerability and connection, all sparked by one man's tears and J.D. Vance's decision to pause and truly see him. The energy in the stadium shifted palpably from scripted enthusiasm to authentic communion as more stories poured forth. A father shared how his son's PTSD strained their family bonds. A widow recounted nights of endless what-ifs, and a young veteran admitted to hiding her anxiety behind a brave facade. J.D. Vance facilitated with quiet strength, ensuring each voice was heard, his presence a steady anchor in the emotional storm. He interjected gently at times, offering words of affirmation that resonated deeply. Your service didn't end with discharge. It continues in how you support one another now. The crowd, once a mass of spectators, became participants, nodding, clapping softly, some embracing strangers nearby. David, seated on stage, watched in quiet amazement as the barriers dissolved. I came here thinking I'd just listen, he said into the mic. But now, it's like a weight is lifting. J.D. Vance smiled warmly. That's the power of being seen. As the sharing continued, the atmosphere thickened with a sense of solidarity. Flags still waved, but now they symbolized not just national pride, but personal perseverance. J.D. Vance's impromptu pivot had turned the event into a sanctuary where grief found expression and isolation gave way to community. Offstage, the search for Amelia intensified, phone calls flying to military databases and family services, a testament to J.D. Vance's commitment to turning words into action. Back in the spotlight, he wrapped up the initial wave of stories with a thoughtful reflection. These aren't interruptions. They're the real reason we're here, to remind each other that no one fights alone. The applause that followed was different, deeper, more heartfelt, as the rally evolved beyond expectations, setting the stage for what would become a life-changing journey. David, no longer just a face in the crowd, felt a spark of hope ignite within, thanks to the man who chose empathy over agenda. And as the evening progressed, the stories kept coming, weaving a collective narrative of loss, love, and the unyielding human spirit. In the wake of that transformative moment on stage, where raw stories had bridged divides and sparked a collective empathy, J.D. Vance's team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, their efforts fueled by a quiet determination to turn words into tangible hope. Calls were made to military archives, survivor benefit offices, and state records, piecing together fragments of information about Corporal Elijah Grant's family with the precision of a puzzle coming into focus. It didn't take long. Within hours, a breakthrough emerged: Amelia, now a 14-year-old girl living in a quiet Michigan town with her mother, who had guarded the memories of her fallen husband like fragile heirlooms. J.D. Vance, upon receiving the update, turned to David with a steady gaze and handed him an envelope containing the details. They found her, he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of promise fulfilled. David's knees weakened, his breath catching in disbelief as he absorbed the news she was alive. Well, and just a flight away, her life unfolding without the full tapestry of her father's love until now. Overwhelmed, David clutched the paper, tears mixing with a tentative smile. This wasn't just closure. It was a door opening to redemption. J.D. Vance arranged for a private flight the next morning, ensuring every detail was handled with care, a gesture that spoke volumes about his commitment to those who served. As the plane lifted off from Colorado Springs, David stared out the window, the envelope in his lap like a lifeline, his mind racing through years of suppressed grief now giving way to anticipation. He rehearsed what he might say, how to convey the depth of Elijah's devotion without overwhelming a girl who knew her father only through faded photos and sparse stories. Meanwhile, in that small Michigan home, Amelia brushed her hair in front of the mirror, a routine morning interrupted by a stirring curiosity she couldn't quite place. "Mom," she asked, her voice soft with unspoken longing. "Did Dad ever talk about me before he passed?" Her mother paused, eyes misting over. "He loved you more than words, sweetheart. That's what matters." But the air felt charged as if fate was whispering change. Then the doorbell rang, and outside stood officials with news that rippled through their lives, a connection from afar, sparked by a rally far away linking them to a soldier who held pieces of their past. Amelia's eyes widened. For me, she whispered, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling up. Back on the ground, David's arrival in Michigan was understated, a car pulling up to the modest house where Amelia and her mother waited on the porch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows that seemed to symbolize the years apart. He stepped out, uniform still crisp, carrying a worn backpack that held treasures from another time. Approaching slowly, he met Amelia's gaze, those eyes so like Elijah's, full of quiet intelligence and unspoken questions. "Hi, Amelia. I'm David. Your dad was my best friend." She swallowed hard, twisting her fingers. "Do you remember what he sounded like?" David smiled, though his lips trembled with emotion. "I remember everything." They moved inside, sitting across from each other in the cozy living room, the air thick with possibility. David opened the backpack, pulling out a small weathered box inside photos of Elijah in uniform, grinning with that infectious joy. His dog tags etched with service and sacrifice, and a journal pages filled with Elijah's handwriting letters addressed to his little girl, dreams for her future, scrawled in moments stolen from the chaos of deployment. "I've carried this for over a decade," David said, his voice steadying as he handed it over. "I think he meant for you to have it." Amelia's fingers traced the cover tentatively, then opened to the first page, her father's words leaping out, notes on her first steps. Hopes she'd chase the stars, affirmations of love that wrapped around her heart like a warm embrace. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent at first, then accompanied by soft sobs. David reached out gently. "He talked about you every day, how you'd swing so high, he'd joke you'd touch the clouds." Amelia looked up, a small laugh escaping through the tears. "Mom says I still do that on the swings." Her mother, watching from the doorway, nodded with a bittersweet smile. The room filling with a sense of completeness long denied. As the afternoon unfolded, stories flowed like a river, finally unblocked. David recounted Elijah's terrible jokes that lightened the darkest patrols, like the time he convinced the squad that MREs were gourmet if you imagined hard enough, earning groans and laughter in equal measure. Amelia hung on every word, her face lighting up at descriptions of her father's protective streak. How he'd share care packages from home just to see his buddies smile. "He carried your pictures in his helmet," David added. Pulling one out, a toddler, Amelia beaming with gap-toothed joy. "Said you were his lucky charm." They moved to the kitchen table, where Amelia's mother brewed coffee, the aroma grounding the emotional whirlwind. David shared more Elijah's dream of teaching history, inspired by his own love of stories that shaped nations. Amelia flipped through the journal, reading aloud a passage where Elijah described her 3rd birthday, the cake smeared on her face, his heart bursting with pride from afar. "I wish I'd known this sooner," she whispered. David nodded. "Me too. But we're here now." The conversation turned lighter as evening approached. David chuckled over Elijah's clumsiness, like tripping during a drill and spilling spaghetti everywhere, dubbing him Pasta Corporal for weeks. Amelia giggled, the sound echoing through the house like music, long absent, her mother joining in with her own memories of Elijah's goofy dances to cheer her up during phone calls home. They stepped outside to the backyard, where a swing set stood sentinel, and Amelia demonstrated her high-flying skills, David pushing gently as they talked about dreams. He said someday you'd swing into the stars, meant it literally and figuratively, David said. Amelia looked skyward. He sounds like a dreamer. He was, David replied, and you're the dream he cherished most. That night, as stars dotted the Michigan sky, David stayed for dinner, the table alive with shared plates and stories, forging bonds that felt both new and eternal. Amelia asked about the tough times, too, the fear, the camaraderie, and David answered honestly without glorifying, painting Elijah as human flawed and profoundly loving. That last moment David shared softly, he thought only of you. Amelia reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Thank you for bringing him back to me. In that simple gesture, a family was reborn, not by blood, but by shared loss and rediscovered love. The next morning brought breakfast together, pancakes stacked high, conversation flowing easily now. Amelia quizzed David on Elijah's favorites music food quirks, and he obliged each detail, adding color to the portrait she'd held incomplete. Did he ever do anything embarrassing? She teased. David laughed. Oh, plenty, like saluting a general so enthusiastically he knocked over a flagpole. The room filled with mirth, healing in its warmth. Later, they walked to a nearby park. Amelia on her bike, David jogging alongside, helping fix a loose chain with the ease of old friends. His phone buzzed midway, Vance checking in. I hope it's going well, he said warmly. Not interrupting, David glanced at Amelia, smiling in the sunlight. It's perfect, sir. Thank you for everything. Vance's voice carried genuine relief. You started something important, David. Keep building on it. Hanging up. David felt a surge of gratitude. Vance's empathy had not only sparked this reunion, but sustained it with quiet support. As the day waned, Amelia turned to him. Will you come back? Without hesitation, I never really left your family, Amelia. I just needed to find my way home. They hugged a promise, sealed the backpack lighter now that its burdens were shared. What began as a search for a lost child had blossomed into mutual salvation. David shedding layers of guilt. Amelia gaining a guardian of memories, their connection, a testament to resilience. Back home, Amelia pored over the journal that night, whispering thanks to the father she'd now know fully, while David in a nearby hotel slept soundly for the first time in years, dreams unhaunted. The journey wasn't over. It was evolving, rippling outward with potential to touch more lives, all because one act of seeing had led to profound reunion. The raw emotion of David and Amelia's reunion in Michigan set off a spark that refused to dim its glow, reaching far beyond that small town, as their story spread like wildfire across the nation. Clips from the Colorado Springs rally. David's tear-streaked confession, Vance's heartfelt pause to listen, and the crowd's swelling wave of shared vulnerability had been captured by countless smartphones and news crews uploaded to platforms where they exploded overnight. Hashtags like #SeeThePain and Veterans. Stories climbed the trending lists, with millions sharing the footage, their comments a flood of connection. This made me call my veteran dad after years of silence, one user posted. Finally, someone who hears us instead of just talking, another wrote. Major networks picked up the story, running segments that praised Vance for his authentic pivot, turning a routine rally into a catalyst for healing, his decision to set aside the script, resonating as a powerful act of humanity. Mental health organizations reported a surge in calls from veterans inspired by David's courage to bare his soul, while donations poured into programs for PTSD support, and family services, all tracing back to that moment when J.D. Vance chose to see a man's pain and act on it. Amelia, now carrying her father's journal like a sacred torch, felt a fire ignite within her, a need to share not just her story, but to help others find theirs. She launched a blog called Letters to Dad, a simple online space where she posted excerpts from Elijah's writings, tender notes about her first words, dreams of her chasing the stars woven with her own reflections on grief, discovery, and love. "I didn't know my dad until David brought him to me," she wrote in her first post, "and I want other kids like me to know they're not alone." The blog took off, shared by veteran communities, influencers, and even schools, drawing readers who left their own tributes. A boy whose father fell in Iraq uploaded a pencil sketch of a soldier. A girl shared a poem about the empty chair at her table. J.D. Vance, following the story closely, amplified it on his platforms, posting Amelia's words, "Show us that healing starts when we share, proud to have been part of this spark." His endorsement sent thousands to the site, turning it into a digital haven, where families swapped advice on navigating survivor benefits, coping with anniversaries, or simply finding words for unspoken loss. The blog's comments section became a tapestry of voices, parents, siblings, children, each thread stitching together a community bound by shared scars. Invitations flooded in the most significant, from organizers of the Veterans Honor Gala in Washington, D.C., a prestigious event attended by decorated generals, Gold Star families, and leaders dedicated to veterans' causes. J.D. Vance, a steady advocate, ensured David and Amelia were at the heart of it, arranging their travel and meeting them beforehand in a quiet side room, his demeanor warm and attentive. "You've started something bigger than you know," he told them, his voice earnest. "Let's keep it moving forward." The gala hall shimmered with flags and soft chandelier light, the air thick with reverence as J.D. Vance took the stage to introduce them. "Tonight, we honor not just those who served, but the stories that carry their legacy forward," he said. His words met with nods from the crowd. Stepping aside, he gave the floor to David and Amelia, who walked up hand in hand, the weight of the moment palpable. David spoke first, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I stood before thousands and said I hadn't done enough. But I've learned that sometimes enough is keeping a memory alive." He turned to Amelia, his eyes softening. "This is Elijah's true legacy, not the medals, but her." Amelia, poised beyond her 14 years, gripped the microphone. "My blog isn't just for me. It's for every kid wondering about the parent they never got to know." The room awayed in a standing ovation, the applause thunderous as attendees approached afterward with their own stories. A grizzled general admitting his own survivor's guilt, a widow offering to fund outreach efforts, a young officer sharing how he'd carried his friend's letters for years. That night, a movement was born. David and Amelia, backed by gala donors and veteran networks, founded the Elijah Project, a nonprofit with a clear yet profound mission: connect children of fallen soldiers with comrades who knew their parents, sharing journals, photos, and personal anecdotes to fill the voids left by war. J.D. Vance championed it from the start, hosting a virtual launch event streamed to thousands where he said, "Support isn't just about laws, it's about bonds like these that rebuild lives." Volunteers flooded in, retired sergeants, digitizing old letters, therapists offering pro bono sessions, even archivists helping track down records. Letters arrived by the dozens daily, a Marine seeking his buddy's son to share stories of their desert nights, a Navy widow hoping for tales of her husband's dry humor. Amelia took on many herself, her blog evolving into the project's digital core, featuring guest posts from kids writing letters to their lost parents, each one a step toward healing. Success stories began to surface: a teenager in Texas meeting his father's platoon mate, learning about campfire debates that mirrored his own love for argument. A girl in California receiving a video message recounting her mother's bravery in a firefight, giving her pride she'd never known. These moments fueled broader change. Veteran suicide hotlines reported increased calls, attributing it to the normalized dialogue the project fostered, breaking the stigma around seeking help. J.D. Vance stayed engaged quietly, advocating for mental health funding in his circles and spotlighting milestones like the Elijah Project's first community picnic, where families gathered under open skies, laughter mingling with tears as they shared photos and memories. Social media buzzed with user-generated content videos of tearful reunions, threaded discussions on silent struggles, forming a digital support network that carried the rally's spirit nationwide. David, once crushed by guilt, now led workshops on vulnerability, his message resonating. Pain isn't weakness, it's a bridge to others. Amelia thrived, speaking at school assemblies with Elijah's journal in hand. This uniform means love, hope, and sacrifice, not just loss. Challenges emerged: logistics of matching families, the emotional toll of revisiting trauma, but the victories shone brighter. A tech donor funded a database to streamline connections, cutting search times. National organizations partnered to scale outreach, hosting regional meetups where stories flowed freely. J.D. Vance's initial act of empathy remained the cornerstone, his ongoing support, a quiet force, showing how one moment of listening could ignite a cascade of healing. The Elijah Project's influence began to shape policy discussions, with advocates citing it as evidence that grassroots efforts bolster systemic support, reducing isolation and fostering hope. David's inbox overflowed with messages. Your speech at the gala gave my brother the courage to talk about his PTSD. Amelia's blog hit thousands of subscribers, each post a thread in a growing tapestry of remembrance, with readers sharing their own letters, some joyful, some anguished, all raw. In quiet evenings, David and Amelia would video chat, brainstorming expansions, perhaps international chapters, to reach children of allied forces or youth camps, focused on legacy building through storytelling. The movement wasn't just about the past, it was forging futures, transforming individual grief into collective strength. J.D. Vance, reflecting in a later interview, captured its essence. We talk about battles won overseas, but the real victories are helping our heroes and their families thrive at home. The momentum continued, a beacon for those still in shadows, proving that courage, when met with compassion, could forge connections that endured. Schools began inviting Amelia to speak her presentations, weaving Elijah's words with her own, inspiring students to value the sacrifices behind the uniform. Veteran groups hosted Elijah Project chapters, each event a step toward community with sunflowers. Amelia's tribute to her father's warmth dotting every gathering. The story's spread wasn't just viral, it was vital, a lifeline for those who thought their pain was theirs alone, showing that one shared moment nurtured by care could change countless lives. The stadium in Colorado Springs buzzed with renewed energy as J.D. Vance returned for a veterans event a year after the rally that had ignited a movement. Flags waved under the bright lights, the crowd's cheers carrying a deeper resonance, infused with the legacy of what had begun when a single tear caught J.D. Vance's eye. David and Amelia stood on stage from the start, their presence a symbol of healing that had spread far beyond that first moment. J.D. Vance stepped to the podium, his voice warm and grounded. Last year, I set aside my script because I saw a man in pain, and I had no idea it would spark a movement that's touched countless lives. He turned to David with quiet admiration. Thank you for your courage in sharing your truth then to Amelia. and thank you for showing us that service lives on through those left behind." The audience erupted, many clutching sunflowers, Amelia's tribute to her father's warmth, as the stadium pulsed with a shared sense of purpose. David spoke next, detailing the Elijah Project's growth, now a thriving nonprofit. With chapters in 10 states, it had connected over 300 children of fallen soldiers with comrades who carried their parents' stories, preserving memories through journals, photos, and heartfelt conversations. Amelia, now 15 and radiating confidence, shared how her blog, Letters to Dad, had grown into a platform with thousands of followers, a space where kids posted their own tributes to lost parents, inspiring schools to adopt storytelling programs that taught the human side of military sacrifice. "Every letter we share," she said, "is a way to keep love alive." J.D. Vance listened intently, then added, "This isn't about one day or one rally. It's about a lifelong commitment to those who've given everything." The applause thundered, a testament to the movement's impact, with data showing a rise in mental health outreach among veterans in connected communities, a direct ripple from the project's work. After the event, J.D. Vance joined David and Amelia for a quieter journey to Arlington National Cemetery, a pilgrimage steeped in reverence. The white headstones stretched endlessly under a crisp sky, each a silent marker of sacrifice. At Elijah's grave, David, in his pressed uniform, rested a hand on the stone. "I brought her brother. She's everything you dreamed." Amelia knelt, placing a sunflower beside the marker, her voice soft but steady. "Hi, Dad. I read your journal every night. It makes me feel like you're here, pushing me to be brave." A trumpeter's taps echoed in the distance, its mournful notes weaving through the rows as they stood in shared silence. David shared more stories. Elijah's love for stargazing, how he'd name constellations after Amelia. During long desert nights, his goofy habit of humming off-key to calm the squad. Amelia soaked it in her fingers, tracing the journal's worn cover, its pages now a bridge between past and present. This wasn't just closure. It was a vow to expand the Elijah Project with cemetery outreach, where families could record oral histories at gravesites, preserving voices for generations. Back in Michigan, Amelia's school hosted a Veterans Day assembly, where she stood before hundreds, journal in hand. "My dad's story taught me that heroes aren't just in movies or history books. They're in our families, and sharing their stories keeps them alive." She read an entry from Elijah about her 3rd birthday cake smeared on her face, his words brimming with joy, despite the miles between them. The students sat spellbound many later, crafting their own letters to veterans, a project that spread to other schools, teaching kids to honor sacrifice through empathy and storytelling. Teachers reported students asking deeper questions about service, some even interviewing local veterans for class projects, fostering a culture of appreciation. David, meanwhile, led monthly virtual gatherings for the Elijah Project, where veterans shared their struggles in safe spaces, from sleepless nights to survivor's guilt. These sessions, partnered with counseling services, saw participants report lower isolation rates, with one study noting a 10% drop in crisis calls among attendees. Messages flooded David's inbox. "Your story gave me the strength to tell my kids about their uncle. I called a hotline because you made it okay to hurt." Amelia's blog, now a cornerstone of the project, evolved into a book deal, compiling letters from kids across the country, with proceeds funding mental health programs. Schools began using excerpts in curriculums teaching empathy alongside history, while libraries hosted readings where families shared their own stories, sunflowers on every table. J.D. Vance continued his quiet support, inviting David and Amelia to his office for a private meeting. The room was warm, lined with books and photos of service members, as he presented them with a framed certificate for reminding a nation that every uniform carries a story and every listener can be a healer. He shared how the Elijah Project had shaped policy talks with lawmakers, citing it as a model for community-driven veteran care, pushing for expanded mental health funding and peer support networks. "You've done more than tell a story," he told Amelia, who blushed. "I just want kids like me to feel they belong." J.D. Vance smiled. "You're teaching a generation to care, and that's everything." As the Elijah Project grew, it incorporated school workshops where teens learned to interview veterans, preserving oral histories and online toolkits for families navigating grief. Its impact was measurable. Communities with active chapters saw a 15% rise in veteran engagement, with support services and suicide attempts dropped in areas with strong project presence linked to the destigmatized dialogue David and Amelia fostered. Challenges persisted: funding gaps, emotional burnout for volunteers, but triumphs outshone them. A tech firm donated a cloud platform to store stories securely, while a national veteran organization funded regional summits where families met to share laughter and tears, each event adorned with sunflowers. David and Amelia's bond deepened through it all. Their weekly calls filled with plans, maybe international chapters for Allied Forces kids, or summer camps where youth could build legacies through art and storytelling. In quieter moments like walks in the park, where Amelia swung high, David pushing gently, they reflected on the journey. "It all started because someone saw me," David said, his voice thick. Amelia grinned. "And now we're seeing others." The movement's legacy wasn't in headlines or numbers alone. It was in the lives rewoven, the families rebuilt, the silences broken. The story carried a profound lesson. Compassion and active listening can mend even the deepest wounds, turning vulnerability into a foundation for communal strength. By creating spaces where people share without shame, we forge resilient communities where no one faces grief alone. This narrative underscores the urgent need to support veterans not just with policies, but with human connection, educating youth to see sacrifice as more than medals, but as stories of love and loss that shape us. It calls for action to reduce veteran suicide through awareness, accessible mental health care, and stigma-free dialogue, reminding us that every individual can spark change by choosing empathy over apathy. In a fractured world, this story proves that healing begins with truly seeing each other, and one act of kindness can ripple into a wave of hope that endures. The Elijah Project's gatherings grew, each one a testament to this truth, with veterans mentoring kids, widows finding community, and teens like Amelia leading with courage. Social media continued to amplify it: videos of kids reading letters at project events, threads of veterans sharing recovery stories, building a digital tapestry of resilience. Schools nationwide adopted Letters to Dad as a teaching tool, fostering empathy in classrooms, while churches and community centers hosted sunflower-themed events, raising funds for mental health. David's workshops expanded training facilitators to lead storytelling circles each session, ending with a pledge. "We see you, and you're not alone." Amelia's book tour drew crowds, her readings sparking tears and hugs, as readers shared their own letters, creating pop-up communities of healing. Through it all, J.D. Vance's initial act of pausing to listen remained the spark, his ongoing encouragement a steady light. In a final reflection, he wrote, "We honor our heroes, not just by thanking them, but by ensuring they and their families thrive. David and Amelia show us how." As the stadium lights dimmed that evening, David and Amelia stood together looking over the empty seats. "What made you speak that day?" Amelia asked, leaning on his arm. David smiled, eyes distant. Maybe it was time, and someone gave me the space to be heard. She nodded. I think Dad would have loved that. He chuckled. Elijah always said the best parts of life are the ones you don't plan. In the quiet, they walked off stage, two souls forever bound, carrying a movement that proved the world could change when we stopped to listen and act with heart.